God morgon. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this morning webinar about green construction and who drives green innovation. My name is Anna Lundgren. I'm a senior researcher at Nordregio, and I have been asked to moderate this session, this webinar today. And today we will have a couple of my colleagues, Alberto Giacometti, Hilma Salonen, and Wøien Meijer, who will present their work on wood construction and on green innovation processes. And at the focus here is really who drives the green innovation and what can we learn from wood construction processes as concern green innovation. This is part of what we call the regional collaboration program under the Nordic Council of Ministers, where we work in different groups. And we have this opportunity that we call the arena to share some of the results from our ongoing research and involve in discussion with practitioners and with academics to discuss our results and learn more. So it's both to share some of our results, but also to get input. And we also today welcome two panelists that will also participate today. Therese Kreisel, who is from Skellefteå Municipality, and we have Andersson, who is from Örebro University, also with us. And then we have a large audience that we will also hope will engage in asking questions in the chat during this webinar this morning. The discussion here is who drives green innovation and what can we learn from wood construction? Who are the main actors? What are the interaction between the system, between the institutions and the actors? What is the interplay here? We have an agenda for the day where Mari, my colleague, a senior researcher also at Nordregio, will start to give us the framework about innovation systems and give a little bit of a context here. And then we will have Alberto Giacometti and Hilma Salonen, who will present a case study report, a working paper that they have elaborated on wood construction in Finland and Sweden. And then after that, we will have a panel discussion with Therese and Ida, and hopefully questions from you in the audience. This webinar is recorded, and after the session today, the audience will also receive a link to the recorded version. So with that, I think we should get started, and I ask my colleague Mari here to come in and give us the framework. Please, Mari.
Sure, thank you so much, and good morning, everybody. I'm going to share some slides as well, so we will start, and I've been given about approximately then 5 minutes to tell you all about the innovation policy framework as it is, as well as the historical account of the academic discourse. And this kind of only really allows me to tell you that this is a very complex and complicated thing in general. Just going to get to the mouse here. Thank you so much. Hopefully you will learn something by the end of this, and then obviously my colleagues will give you a more intricate kind of perspective on it later on. But we start with the father of modern innovation theory, which is Joseph Schumpeter. He took him some time to arrive at this quote called, or this term called creative destruction, but he did that in 1942, and it forms the fundamental understanding of what innovation truly is, which is transformation. And he has this incredibly famous quote about the gales of destruction and whatnot, but I've rendered it down for you, and it's essentially mutation of what already exists. And what that actually means in terms of innovation is that it is the death and the instant rebirth of economic structures. So it kind of goes hand in hand in that sense. But what about innovation policy then? So looking at what innovation policy actually looked like in the 50s and the 60s and the 70s, it is really clear that it was based on two premises, and that was the unquestionable premise that technological advancement has been a powerful instrument for human progress, but then a bit more questionable premise as well, that policymakers were kind of all knowing. They really knew what they had, that they had like the sufficient knowledge to guide technological advancement, which we've kind of moved away from today. Then in the 1980s, we see the birth of cluster policies and geographical innovation theories. In the 1990s, we have the policies to support, why is this not working? There we are. Policies to support stability. So you kind of then create policies for the big stable policy, the big stable innovators, instead of the small companies. But then that would be kind of supporting the small companies in the long run. And today we've moved on to kind of trying to solve these kind of grand societal challenges. So we're moving from picking technologies to picking the problem that we need to try and solve. And there's also a lot of theories here. And first of all, I thought we could consider the proximity theory by Boschma. And we know about geographical proximity, as I already told you, about cluster policies, that, you know, if you group loads of people together in one space, you might have quite a lot of innovation happening there. Silicon Valley is a really good example here. But we also have other forms of proximity, such as, for example, cognitive proximity or social proximity, institutional proximity, etc., which says something about our ability to understand, adopt, adapt, absorb, and exploit new knowledge. So the interesting thing here is that whether cognitive proximity actually means that there is a death of distance in innovation theory. But we also have more geographical perspectives on this. We have national innovation systems, which says something about the home market, and that the home market still plays an important role in globalization. But then we also have this national perspectives when it comes to designing policies to solve these grand societal challenges that we're facing. Then we have regional innovation systems, and that is because the national lens is not always the most appropriate lens to use when we're investigating things. And a regional innovation system essentially is understanding how these subsystems connect on a regional level. But we also have technological systems, which is essentially based on knowledge and competence rather than goods and services. And then you also have sectoral innovation systems, which is a network of agents. So there's quite a few different things here. And what it really comes down to is, you know, if you have what you have here and what lens you choose to apply when you're investigating innovation systems essentially depends on the questions that you also pose. So what is your question, essentially? And then finally, we looked at one compelling theory and conceptual approach for this discussion paper that we wrote, which is kind of then based on Grilich and Sotterato's trinity of change agency. And you see this lovely little figure here. And when you have these, these three things are always present in an innovation system on the regional or national scale. And the first one is innovative entrepreneurship, which is essentially that entrepreneurs are the instigators of change, and they are the ones that lead to economic changes. Then you have institutional entrepreneurship, which basically means that you have growth paths that really need institutional structures in order to devolve and develop. And then we have place-based leadership in the end, which is crucial for organization, and it's all about then pooling competences and whatnot. But what is clear here is that innovation is not linear, and that is what is so fascinating and interesting about innovation theory as well. It is complicated, and how we make policies for this is one of the main questions. So that was a bit about the literature review that we did and the discussion paper. My colleagues Alberto and Hilma would now give a detailed account of what they found in their field research and looking in then at the wood construction industry in Sweden and Finland. Looking forward to hearing about that. And then you have to stay tuned as well, because we're going to write about proteins, unconventional proteins in the future, and that will be probably published in the late autumn, I think. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you so much, Marie, for this introduction and for putting this topic of today into a context and into a framework. So now we welcome Alberto and Hilma here to present today's report. Please.
Good morning. Just a second, we'll get our slides in the screen. And there they are. All right, welcome from our part as well. So now, after this overview that Mari gave us, we can go into the practicalities of green innovation to see what is really happening in the field. And for that reason, we are looking at wood construction, and especially in Sweden and Finland. Our presentation today will focus on the drivers of green innovation and wood construction, but then the whole report, of course, discusses a variety of other aspects as well. So if you want the whole picture, then we invite you to take a look at our case study report. And I think the link for that will be found in the chat a bit later, or maybe even right now. So then a few words about why we thought that this would be worth doing, why we think that this is relevant or even highly topical. There is a few reasons for that even. For one part, it's because of to reach the goals of the Paris Agreement, the Agenda 30 climate goals, it is very important that the construction sector is involved because the share of emissions is huge. It's almost 40%. A lot of that comes from building materials. So then it would seem very natural to switch from concrete and steel to wood, or maybe have some kind of hybrid solutions where you replace part of them, mainly because it's much more less energy intensive as a process. And then there is other benefits as well, such as carbon capture and also health benefits, social benefits, and so on. All of this, of course, assuming that it is sourced sustainably, which is a contested question, but so complex that it's kind of a matter of another study as well. And then it is also highly topical from the perspective of innovation studies. It may seem a bit strange from the beginning, think of wood as an innovative material. Of course, people have been building with wood from the beginning of times, but it is now experiencing a sort of a renaissance following a large policy shift, of which we'll talk more in a minute, when this huge blanket ban of the 19th century was lifted, enabling structuring these whole wooden districts, such as you can see here in the photo in Växjö.
Yeah, so when we talk about innovations in wood construction, what are we talking about really? Of course, there is the technologies, from material science to product innovation, structures surrounding fire safety, vibrations, acoustics, energy efficiency. So be it, it's huge areas to cover. And as you can see in the pictures, some of the key products that have been in development are the so-called engineered wood products, or mass timber. On the top picture, you see a big panel of CLT, or cross-laminated timber, which is laminated timber glued in cross sections, which allows to use it for slabs or walls. And in the bottom picture, you see a beam structure made of glue lam, or glue laminated timber, which is timber glued together in the same direction. And with that, you can build beams and the frame of buildings, columns. But a lot of development also occurs in related products or technologies. For example, more sustainable woods, or X-ray systems to pick the best quality wood and for resource efficiency and so on. But many of these wood products already have been there for a while. So a lot of the innovation has actually taken place around building systems and industrialization. And a key word here perhaps is the degree of industrialization or prefabrication, where we move from a system where we've mostly constructed buildings on site to a more of a manufacturing process. So we move construction to a factory setting. And in this process of industrialization, of course, we have come up with a number of different building systems. also within wood construction. So we can keep to more rather conventional systems where we simply replace concrete and steel columns and frames with mass timber columns and frames. But we have also more prefabricated systems using elements, as you can see in the second picture, where a wall element is brought on site and then assembled. And then we can go even to further prefabrication to build modules. As you can see in the last picture, it's almost like a human scale Lego that you just pile on top of each other and assemble. And prefabrication can go to such an extent that it can include all kinds of electric installations and toiletry tiles, so on. And of course, there's all kinds of hybrid systems as well, combining different wood systems or wood and concrete and so on. And then finally, we can talk a lot about systems innovation. So there's a whole rules of the game, a sectoral transformation starting from regulations, planning systems, business model, financial structures, but the overall organization of the work as well, the contractors and subcontractors, where they are and how they are organized.
So what we really set out to find out is who is behind all of this context that we now gave to all this technological context. Was it like this one enlightened being who just woke up one morning and had this new law or new regulation, new policy document, or this new technical innovation? Or is there a lot happening behind the scenes that we just don't see? These are the things that you usually do see. So there's all of a sudden there's a new law, everything changes, or there's a new funding going into this direction, or there is like something pretty flashy as this new wooden high-rise, the Sara Kulturhus in Skellefteå. And it's really important that we realize the whole process that can be tracked behind you see this great change in front of your eyes to see how to support innovation better and also how to support sustainability transitions better.
Yeah, so what is the issue here is that these processes that lead to that law or to that new building are sometimes not documented. It's hard to find what led to that process. So this is what we have been trying to do in this study, to try to reconstruct the historical processes that led to these major changes. And please don't tire your eyes trying to read this slide. This is just to show that we have put a timeline. You can see in the middle an arrow where in the right hand side we have collected or mapped some of the key policy developments, even 1 or 2 centuries back. And on the other side, we have the market and societal developments. And this is to show just the complexity of all the things that have mattered in over time. And here we are just scratching the surface. We just map what is being brought up by some of our interviewees. So what we have learned from this is that, of course, we have centuries of accumulated knowledge in technologies and processes of building systems that have led us to where we are today.
And then in the middle of all this accumulated knowledge, there came this kind of a shock that seems to bring it all into Wøien after there had been decades of really destructive fires in many European countries, and it resulted in a total ban on all urban multi-story wood construction, both in Sweden and in Finland in the mid-19th century.
But of course, this did not stop development and innovation and construction as such. Of course, many single-family homes and low-rise homes continue to be built in wood, especially in the Nordic countries where there is vastly available resources. But innovation as well did not stop. Around the 1920s, there are already a handful of companies developing modular systems, for instance, where mostly on a small scale and for temporary structures. And there's also evidence of some first uses of mass timber in churches, for example, or barns, some bigger structures.
Then another external shock, something that seems a bit unrelated to wood construction, which is the Second World War. And in Sweden, for example, it created the need to mobilize the army quickly to protect the national borders. And it means that there's this need for a quick solution, rapidly assembled housing, something that can be done in a mass-produced way and in a quick, efficient manner.
So wood construction or these modular solutions came handy at this point of time. And this enabled the industry to build capacity, to mass produce modules or similar half prefabricated systems in wood construction. That also was a key milestone or precondition for then in the 50s, when there was an urbanization trend or accelerated urbanization trends. Wood construction became tested more broadly in society, or like these modular systems came tested broadly in society.
And again, the governments answer to this new situation in their own way. For example, in Finland, there was a new zoning law which led to the planning of whole new districts at once, again supporting this mass production, scaling up of housing production. And in Sweden, there was the Million Homes program, which, as the name suggests, meant the goal of building million homes in the span of only 10 years. And even though both of these developments are known for this concrete high-rises of the 60s style, actually, for example, in Sweden, 2/3 of these million home houses were single-family homes or row houses, which were usually built from wood.
So these, of course, generated a huge boost further to the wood construction industry, to the point that in the late 90s, 80 to 90% of all family homes in the Nordic countries were built in wood, of which a vast majority of these were built in more industrialized kind of systems. So not the log houses, but already modular or prefabricated, partially prefabricated systems.
And then it was a time for a real game changer with the EU accession for 94 in Sweden, 95 in Finland, which meant that the national laws had to be adapted to the EU standards, which were more function-based than material-based, which just meant that there really wasn't a need to ban wood as a material anymore. And therefore, the ban was lifted. In Finland, this happened pretty gradually, in Sweden quite rapidly. And then after you have this new potential and kind of like this whole new policy area, it means also that there is a flow of new strategies, new programs, triple helix programs, research, what have you, some of it directly supporting wood construction and some kind of just like opening up this space of opportunity for it.
So this was really a game changer for wood construction, mainly for high-rise building, because of course it enables this sector to penetrate more urban developments, high density, and also the rebirth of mass timber products, which up until this point have been mostly used for exceptional kind of projects, event hall, stadium, or something like that. But now it can be rolled out for the housing market in general. So with this, you could say that maybe there was a marriage. Market and state were finally on the same terms. They found each other, and the story ends here, and they lived happily ever after.
Yeah, that would be very nice if this was a Hollywood story. But in reality, this is usually where the story begins. And that also means that this is where all the problems begin, because now you see the width of the problems. There was all these major expectations, major optimism, but in reality, the development has been much lower than anticipated or than kind of written out in these policy programs. And of course, it makes sense, since after there has been this century of hegemony of concrete and steel, there is a whole system built around it, all these networks, all this knowledge gathered just to support the established conventional system. There's a lot of like very detailed examples that I could give, but for example, even though the national regulations changed at the municipal level, there was still a lot of barriers that existed. For example, in like zoning and planning systems, they take a long while to change when all plans have been made to support or to serve these conventional structures. Also, industrial capacity takes a long while to build, and then that leads to everything being a bit more expensive, a bit more slow. There is this, when the market is not very ready because of this industrial capacity, there's a lot of, for example, perceptions and fears. Will it burn down? Will it mold? What have you? This is, of course, linked to the knowledge gap as well. Even architects maybe don't have much knowledge about wood construction when it comes to high-rise or multi-story wood construction. And then all of this linking to this high path dependency, which means that there are these very strong lobbies of concrete and steel producers. They have a strong industrial legacy, and it all links to, you could all sum it up under structural inertia, which is something that is very hard to break in one go.
So to break this structural inertia, there needed to be a process of systems integration. So where distinct sectors, distinct systems with their own supply chains and their own business ecosystems had to come closer together. And that means, of course, flow of skills, flow of labor, and building bridges between the supply chains. As this comes together, of course, in the beginning, there is only a few pioneers that jump into the trend, that take this window of opportunity, whereas the majority resist change or simply don't have any knowledge about what is going on. And as there is resistance to change, the pioneers don't have an easy way ahead, so to say. So they have to take it in their own hands, and this practically means that often they had to operate downstream or upstream in the supply chain. So, for example, Martinson's a Swedish company that started as a sawmill and producing wood materials, developed or became also a construction company, to the extent also of providing design and consultancy. Whereas another example, Lindbäck's was a construction company from the start, and opted to go into modular construction, but also having its own real estate company, they were able to create demand for themselves. But this flow of knowledge and skills did not happen only within these two ecosystems, so to say. Knowledge flew from in and out into other systems as well. For example, the automotive industry has been quite crucial. Skills from that sector moved into the industrialization processes of wood construction, have been essential for setting up the production line of modular houses, for example. But also from architects, from design, and also backwards. These new experiences had to feed into the knowledge of the financial sector, into the insurances, that for them to assess what are the risks and how to give new loans in different kind of financial structures for the banks, for example.
Then it's important to remember that, of course, the public institutions are not like this single entity either. And also that they have played kind of different type of roles in different phases of this process. So of course, at the beginning, the EU and the national ministries had a very crucial role. After all, they did change the rules of the game. They are the source of major funding and so on. But then after this initial stage, it has actually been municipalities and regions that have been a very important driving force. They have had a variety of tools. They have had like official policy tools such as planning, public procurement, land agreements, zoning, but also these softer tools such as they have more direct relations with the local businesses, the local forest industries, for example. They know how to mobilize actors, form clusters perhaps, build trust, share risks, all this important grassroots work. And then After that, the national level may activate again, as is happening now with the new limit values of carbon emissions in construction.
So enabling the development of wood construction boils down mostly to the intersections between actors. So of course, regulation has played a very important role. Innovation, technological innovation has played an important role, but it is really this push and pull forces between market and regulators and supply and demand with the clients, with the society at large, with the general knowledge about this, that really drives systemic change. And this becomes very practical in some ways. For example, this triple helix R&D projects have been quite important, and also in sharing risks, as Hilma already brought up. In the iconic project, for example, the Sara Culture House in Skellefteå, it was very important that the municipality, the architects, and also the building companies shared the risk, because there were a lot of unknowns, and to be able to be convinced to this project, there needed to be that trust connection between them.
So as a sum up, we really appreciate this quote that one of the experts we interviewed provided us. You just need to shake the ketchup bottle for some time, and then it all comes at once, which we interpret as meaning that in the beginning there is all this resistance, structural inertia. You have to take careful steps. It seems like a very slow process, and then it all happens at once. All the good things that seem like they're never going to happen, pilot projects, new kind of funding, new factories, everything that you can imagine, perhaps.
So who is to shake the bottle? That's the question that we have posed here. What are the roles of different actors? And of course, the simple answer here that we come up is it's not one enlightened actor that drives the processes, but it's the sum of actions from multiple actors that lead to systemic change. So the magic really happens at that intersection between actors. And so that here's maybe the policy lesson, so to say, that we have to support these interactions. And maybe one final result also from our study is that we cannot see actors as being static, or stakeholders to be static, but also as the system changes, the role of these actors also changes. And I guess we can discuss this more in the debate as we follow. Maybe there's new perspectives coming along. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Alberto and Hilma, for this work that you have been conducting in mapping out all the stakeholders, all the actors involved in wood construction. Now you will come back a little bit later here in the program, but now we would like to introduce our two panelists that we have with us today, Therese Kreisel and Ida Andersson. We also had Fredrik Lindblad, who was supposed to also participate from Växjö, but unfortunately he could not attend. So we will. But I also know that Ida has some previous knowledge about what has been going on in Växjö that you could perhaps share with us. So, Therese Kreisel, you are the head of urban planning in Skellefteå Municipality, and you are also an architect with a strong interest in wood construction building, and you've been involved in this famous building that we saw a picture of in Alberto's and Hilma's slides on the Sara Cultural House. And you also told me that you have a wood construction strategy that you're working on in Skellefteå to update at the moment. That could be interesting to hear more about. And also Skellefteå is one of the front runners when it comes to wood construction in multi-story buildings. So look forward to hear a little bit more from you. And then we also have Ida Andersson, who is a senior lecturer and associate professor in human geography at Örebro University. And you have been working with wood construction in your research for a long time, I believe back since 2016, and have also explored what are the effects on the labor market when it comes to wood construction, those processes. And you also told me when we talked before that you're interested in using different methods when you do your research. And I think this is a typical context that the complexity of the processes that Alberto and Hilma just presented to us. I think that is a good example of where those multi-methods approach are quite useful in research. But I would like to start with you, perhaps, Therese. What is your experience with wood construction, and what are your initial reflections on the work that Hilma and Alberto presented today?
I read it with great interest, I must say, and I think it reflects almost all aspects of what I see as the key factors of what drives innovation within this field. But my reflection also is that there is, I would say there's much more human interest and much more human interaction that really drives, and personal interaction that drives innovation in this field. Because as we know, for a long time now, in the modern era of building, I would say when you talk about mass building, concrete or how to say materials added together has been a preferred way to ensure that the economy is secure within every project and so on. But we see the increase of the building in wood as a result of also having a great interest in the climate change, which makes it a necessity to actually explore, and it's a driver itself for innovation. My experience, my personal experience of wood building begins quite early. Being a young child building high rises, this normal, you build a hut, but my best friend and I, we built a 11-storied hut that we made an internal staircase and so on. It was torn down by our parents because it was too dangerous. But that was our innovation. We did not just want to build a shack or, as kids do. We wanted to build something else, and we had the free, material free. So we were actually really challenging the stability and the materials that we had. Later on, I went about by the university, and I ended up after the second master in architecture. And my first experience was really to go in an industry, in a wooden industry in the south of Sweden, owned by Derome, and to build flat pack houses, and to understand what drives cost and how you can cut costs in the development and construction of those houses. That was taking out one or being innovative, creating a new model for the family market. So that was a very hands-on. I was 7 weeks in a blue overall, also building the house parts to understand how it stabilizes, what it needs, and what other materials goes in, and to understand really the industrial production by hand, and then going to the drawing board every other week. And so that was a really good lesson for me to understand what drives cost as a total in homes. But later on, I also came into big construction projects, which then was not wood, but concrete. And so the switch between, I think it's important, and I think this is important for the building sector, you know, what drives innovation. And I think you have Giro d'Italia, they have a yellow t-shirt on, who's, you know, is the one in the front. And I think it's very important, actually, that materials alternate to have the front role in being innovative, because as wood pushes itself to be innovative, to take market shares, the concrete part of the market will not sit still. And this, I think, is the good part of innovation, because it challenges the different parts of the market. And that's how innovation is driven. And I think Skellefteå, you know, if I go back, you know, I've looked at it at a very small scale, being in the production, in the innovative production, but also being looking at the market as a whole, what drives innovation and market shares and so on. And I think it also comes with actually the curious mind of different people. And we should not, make the importance of courage and innovative ideas of individuals in this, and having the drive and different ideas and the tools, of course. So it all adds up in a very complex picture. And I think, looking at this, I think the only thing when I read the report is that I see that there is the factor, the individual that drives with ideas, having the tools, having the experience, having the meetings take place and so on. That's very important. And seeing Skellefteå with the knowledge, tradition and all, having the possibility, but also having the need to be courageous, having the need to actually innovate from the platform that Skellefteå itself owns, and that's wood tradition. I think the same goes for Växjö. They own their own innovative platform and knowledge, and that's very important.
Yeah. Exciting. And this human interaction that you're pointing to, Therese, was that something that you also picked up upon, Ida, or what is your relation? How do you understand this wood construction sector based on your experiences, and how do you reflect on what has been presented here?
Well, I mean, of course, there's a human aspect of this industry, and it's, I mean, I've followed this gang around since 2016 or even earlier also, because I did research previously in Växjö, focusing on the green branding of cities, and that brought me to Växjö, and then I came across this wood building, so that became a new project that I started on in 2016. And as you mentioned before, Anna, I've worked with multi-methods, and one of these methods has been participatory observation. So I've spent quite a lot of time. I met Therese many times at these wood house meetings and seminars and conferences and so on. And of course, it's very much related to humans, because it's a quite tightly knit group that is the inner core of Swedish wood building, you could say, of the sector or the industry. And it's both, of course, private companies, but you also have policy makers and people representing politics and policy, being public servants in various ways, planners and architects and so on. So you have this group of people, and of course they matter in understanding what is happening here, of course. But that was not what kind of struck me when I read this. And of course, I mean, being a researcher in social science, we're trained from early on to have a critical perspective. And what I picked up on, and we also talked before, you and I, Anna, about this, that I find that it's a bit of a lack of critical perspective, perhaps, in the report. I mean, there's many good things going on, but if it's green, I don't know. Because, I mean, you can very much talk about, I mean, wood building is definitely bio-based. But I think the main thing that is kind of missing in this whole discussion, and it's like that the grounds for the greenness, or whatever you would like to call it, in wood building, it's based on photosynthesis. So the carbon sink and the renewable aspect of wood building, that is not something that comes from innovation itself. It comes from nature. And this has made, in my opinion, there's a lot of, we call it accidental sustainability. And also this law that came in 94 when Sweden was going to be a part of EU, that change of policy that made wood building possible, taller than 2 stories. It had nothing to do with wood building. It was a change of the regulations of how the fire safety hazard regulations was, how they were defined. So I mean, I miss a bit of this discussion about what does it mean to actually be green, not just wood-based, but actually be green. And this, because you have all these qualities that you could attribute this building material, but you don't really discuss it. You take it for granted rather. And this is something that when I read these types of reports, I often but where is the critical perspective in this? And I would like I would like to see more in that. And it's also related to these policies. I mean, if you have these qualities that comes from this particular building material, why not make these qualities, instead of saying we're going to build in wood, we can say we're going to build houses with these that represent these qualities, and then you can invite all sorts of materials to come and build, because we have a housing shortage in Sweden, and the wood building sector will not be able to provide for that entirely. And then I think if you really mean that you want to have a green innovation in the building sector, you should focus rather on the qualities of the material than naming the material itself. But that's just just my initial comment.
Thank you. I think we have Therese also coming in, commenting on that.
I do agree, Ida, totally. And I think one of the main efforts of Thora, a cultural house, which I point out every time when we have visitors, is that I think it's an example, it's a great example of a wooden house, but it's also a great example of something that I really, really long for, and that we are seeing the possibilities and the starts of, and that's material optimization, and using less material in the right place, and using it in a way so it could be assembled later on, which makes it a life cycle. It shows the life cycle and the possibility of that. And I think, talking about the yellow shirt of Italia, I think it's very important that every stride from every material, really, now we're talking about wood, really challenges the other materials, and the material optimization in itself, using as little material as possible, but using the strength of each material. That's very important. And I think, perhaps it's been in that way, I think wood has been a game changer in a way, because it challenges steel. It challenges concrete. But in the end, I really, really hope that we will, that we are aiming for material optimization in different ways, which actually will examine the materials over again, in a way, looking from different.
I believe this also links to where we put the focus. If we put the focus on wood construction, or we put the focus on building smarter societies, or expanding the perspective. But I was a bit curious on your experiences of similarities and differences between two of the frontrunners, the Skellefteå and Växjö. And if you could expand a little bit on that, Ida, and perhaps come back to also this issue of where do we put the focus, and what is green innovation in this context?
Yeah, well, I mean, I've done, I come from Skellefteå, so I have a personal knowledge of Skellefteå for my entire life. But I've done a lot of research in Växjö, of course, and some in Skellefteå. So, I mean, if we look at the development of this green, I mean, also, once again, it's also connected to branding. And here too, I find it's important to have a critical perspective of what does it mean to call yourself a green city or a wood building city, and wood building municipality. But I mean, in Växjö, you definitely see that the interest in wood building, it comes from this, I mean, it connects to the story of and the brand of Växjö as Europe's greenest city, which is kind of this patchwork of various types of policies that are linked together through this narrative of branding. You have the cleaning of the lakes, and you have this the changes that was made in the power plant, which has, I mean, nowadays it has a very good value for branding, but at the time it was more of a change because they didn't want to use oil for other reasons that was not connected to sustainable development. So I mean, you have all these kind of policies that had been patched together in this green brand, where wood building is one. But what is interesting is that many of these kind of early flagship projects that were built in Växjö, they are not from the local area. They are produced by one of the main producers in Västerbotten, Martinsson. So many of the projects that has been showcased in Växjö are not locally produced. And I think this is one important difference between the two cities. And we can go in and talk about Skellefteå also, because I mean, that the brand is not so much about green. It has been much more about wood and naming the wood as a part of the branding strategy, and not a part of a wider discussion on green. But the fact that many of the early local showcases in Växjö were produced in Skellefteå kind of points to this difference between the two municipalities, because wood building in Skellefteå, from my point of view, has very much been connected to the local labor market and ambition of creating jobs. And then this kind of opportunity of creating, more value for the forest, or for like wood products. And it relates to, of course, the research that has been ongoing in what is now called RISE, but it was used to be SP Trätek, I think, in Skellefteå and so on. But I mean, it's very much connected to the local labor market, whereas in Växjö, you can see this, connection to this brand and the branding of Växjö, which is very much about lowering CO2 emissions in various ways. So there's a kind of a big difference between the two and how they have arrived to this point. There's also a difference in terms of politics, because in Skellefteå we have this long tradition of having a social democratic majority, I think for at least 50 years, perhaps even longer.
60.
But it's been 60, yeah. I mean, it's been a one-party town, perhaps you can say, for a very long time. They've been able to do whatever they want, more or less. I mean, they don't have to negotiate with anyone else but themselves. Whereas in Växjö, you would have this kind of swing state situation where sometimes it's social democrats that, is the leaders, and sometimes it's the Moderaterna or the conservatives. But what has been unique for Växjö in this case, and what has aided them in their development towards this green branding, where Woodhouse is part of, is that they have been very much in agreement when it comes to environmental issues. And this, I mean, you could attribute it very much to local politicians on the conservative side who has a strong personal interest in environmental questions. So, I mean, when I've talked to people working as policymakers, working with wood building in various ways in Växjö, they say, well, we don't have to think about the election results, because regardless who swings the mallet, we know that wood building will be a part of what we do. So they can just continue working with this, with their plans. And I think this, I mean, regardless of how you create political continuity, if it's the same party that runs for 60 years, or if it's you have this kind of swing situation, but you are in agreement on the policy related to wood building, I think this creates, a calmness, or there's a kind of stability that you can do this longer projects that takes, time to develop, and also build up these. Well, we talked about people earlier, these trusts between people, and that that, okay, well, we did this project together. Some stuff of that project went well, other stuff went not so great, but we can do a new, we try again. And then you have this kind of build these trust relationships over time. So I think that's also something that it's, I mean, they are different, the cities, and the drivers for why they want to build in wood are completely different, but what they share is also this kind of stability of we're doing this for a long period of time. And I don't know, Therese, if you would agree, but
yeah, I agree. I would say to 90% or something like that, because there is, however, a difference also in the stability, I would say, because I think it's a good description, however, between the differences in a way. But I think also what drives in Skellefteå is it's more or less that the green, the sustainability within it is so unquestionable that in a way that because it drives social sustainability, like you said, with the labor market, but it's also sort of wanting to contribute to a bigger picture of greenness. And that's something that is very outspoken also from the politicians, that Skellefteå wants to contribute, as a countryside. The countryside should be able and will be able to contribute to the growth of cities. We deliver, materials and buildings and so on for the cities. And as we do that, also building new knowledge on tradition on our campus in this triangular sort of way of working, with the official side, the commercial side, and the academic side of it, then being RISE and the Luleå and Umeå being part of the campus here. That in itself contributing to the knowledge of Sweden, and I think the branding, we've focused so long on branding ourselves as an innovative and sustainable place for new industry, that we take, I would say, wood building a little bit for granted. I'm not sure. I don't know how you see on that, Ida. Do you agree that we take it a bit for granted?
I think I don't know if for granted. I mean, not everyone developing houses and different types of construction in Skellefteå are you know, extremely happy about this wood building. So I don't know if it's taken for granted, but I mean, you since it's I mean, with the political landscape being what it is, it's also possible to just decide, now we're doing this, and then you make it happen, kind of. But I mean, there's many different things happening now, or things happening in my head, I should say, that I just wanted to comment on. But I mean, one of the things, I mean, when you say you take it for granted, I think, of course, there's also this, I mean, it will be very interesting to see what happens with wood building in Skellefteå now, when you have like Northvolt coming in, and if there will be like a, you know, like a migration from talking about wood building into talking about, you know, this type of building in a different framing. Not everything is about branding, of course, but I mean, it's related. I think also, I mean, in this context, it's important to I mean, really acknowledge this accidentalness of, and I want to stress this, I mean, the accidentalness of the wood building as green. Because I mean, when I talk to people who were the pioneering researchers on campus Skellefteå, you know, in the 90s, when they built Lundgren and so on, and they, you know, they started out trying these like early projects, they were like, yeah, I mean, there was nothing, I mean, there was nothing that was connected to sustainability that you know, made them do it. It was only like a curiosity of like, wow, we go to Austria to learn about something that they've done for 40 years in Austria, and we try to copy it at home. And just because we have this industry, it's a big industry, we have lots of forests around. What if we start building houses like this? Could that, you know, potentially be bigger economic returns for like for the invested with material, basically? So it was very late in the process, if you talk about innovation, that they I mean, actually started thinking about sustainability. And I mean, we also have to, I mean, we're in 2023, but I mean, Agenda 2030, it's only 8 years old. So I mean, there's been lots of things happening. Of course, sustainability was discussed before that, but it has really been enforced in policy with Agenda 2030 and the Sustainable Development Goals. And I mean, it has not really been filtered into the innovation. It has been much more about like entrepreneurial, like curiosity. Oh, can we do this? What if we put the beams like this? And you know, I shouldn't.
But that connects pretty well, I think, to our next question, which is about the drivers for green innovation. And based on the report presented today, we see that this is a very complex context with state regulations playing a role, municipalities, R&D, triple helix networks. You talk about the human interaction. We talk about demand, these industries, due to this structural inertia, having to build up their own market logic or own demand. What do you think about the main drivers for green innovation? Are all these different bubbles, these different actors or different institutions all equally important, or would you like to point out some key drivers that are more important than others before we let in Alberto and Hilma here back again into the discussion? Just quickly.
I would just like to point out that that we don't. What I meant was that we don't take wood building, the wood building for granted, but we sort of, I think, take the idea of the wood building as a part of the green picture of Skellefteå for granted. That's how I meant it. Not we don't take the wood building for granted, not at all. But the key drivers for the green transition, I would say, it's an interest of I think it's luckily how, when you read, what's his name, Florida, in a way that you come in a state of mind in a society where actually you have development rising up from development, as innovation drives innovation in a way. And I think that's a state of mind. That's one of the drivers, really, the key drivers. And it's where I would say,
is it a culture?
In a way, yeah.
When you talk about a state of mind, a specific culture.
Yes, and I think one of the drivers is that you create an atmosphere, or where something, or a platform where something is produced, but also how do you say, you promote it. You come with an idea and it's promoted, and you sort of push each other, and I think that's a very good state of mind, and I mean that's a very, very fragile state of mind for or a group or a place to have. What we see, we never made as wood building something that we demand. We offer, you sort of say, we would like you to do it, but we don't demand you to do it. And what we see is that there's a lot of a lot of actors that come up that of that atmosphere, that branding. And I think branding, it's a hard driver to be sustainable, to be part of a movement. So that's
interesting. What would you like to point out as the key drivers, Ida?
Key drivers for innovation? Money.
Yes.
No, but I mean, I think it's important to, I of course, there's innovation in wood building, but when we connect it to green innovation, there should also be, and I was missing this in Marie's presentation actually, what does it mean to have green innovation? Because then you put an element of, transformation or sustainability or resilience or whatever type of concept we would like to build to this. And of course, green can also be interpreted, as it often is in the Swedish context, in relation to like emission of greenhouse gases and things like that. But that it should be, if we look at green innovation in this context, then it's not just the money or the will of doing something better, or but it's also the will of creating change. Not creating change perhaps for me or for my work buddies, but strive towards some kind of societal transformation. And I don't think necessarily that Swedish wood building is at that point that they are really looking at the this societal change from that point of view, because of this accidental sustainability that I'm kind of coming back to. Because in many situations it feels like, but wood building, it has this potential of being a carbon sink. We're happy with that, instead of like, okay, so how could we explore the quality of being a carbon sink? How could we maximize that in terms of like utilizing that? So I think there's potential or room to improve, but I mean, generally, what drives innovation is, I mean, do you have a new invention of some sort, and then you commodify it so that you make return on your investment. If you're going to be like very blunt on it. Yeah.
I just want to say, Ida, I'm so happy you said the money, that I didn't have to. But in a way, that if you explore that even further, to take, adding the material optimization, the innovation, and the money, is it also, and this is a question, this is not an answer, is it also a shift of power?
We would like to also have Alberto and Hilma coming back here, who have now listened to you, to share some of your reflections on what has been said, and we have a chat where we hopefully have some questions. Should we Should we just let Vaida in to share something from the chat, and perhaps we can pick up on that at the same time?
Yes, hello everyone. I've been following the chat, which is also is much about sustainability of the industry, decarbonization goals, policies, frameworks, and branding. I think participants are reflecting on that too. So perhaps the first question would be to Alberto and Hilma. In your work, when you were looking into this wood construction sector, have you also covered or discovered actually something about renovation and retrofit of existing buildings? We talked a lot about the new buildings and new building creation, but what share or which kind of part does retrofitting takes place in the wood construction?
Yes, well, maybe as in contribution to the discussion that was already taking place, our research question has been to identify what are the drivers and who are the actors, rather than to judge whether wood construction is or is not sustainable, right? I think this is, first of all, more of a job for ecologists than for us social political scientists to say, right? Of course, internally we have had huge discussions ourselves about, is it really sustainable or is it not? In fact, perhaps some of the highest critics, some ecologists say that in Sweden there is very little forest, and what there is really is monocultures or tree plantations, if we want to go very to the other side of the discussion, of course. But here we are not judging that. It hasn't been our research question here to see, okay, is it green or is it not? But really, what is driving? And here we'd like to maybe build on what the discussion has brought up already. Much of this is accidental, and there's no single enlightened actor. It is quite complex and is not a linear development in that sense. When it comes to retrofitting, and that's a very specific question indeed, and it's interesting that this is brought up, because of course the most sustainable building is the one that you don't have to build. I mean, if you have to keep the buildings that are already there and just keep them functioning for a longer time, of course that would be more sustainable. And there's a big discussion about this also in the Baltic countries actually, where there is a less of a housing boom, but there's a lot of existing stock that needs to be renovated. And we haven't studied this specifically. I know that this is a big topic of discussion. Yeah, I would just drop it there. But of course, maybe one of the panelists also has some knowledge about this.
Not so much retrofitting, but I mean, you have this, I think it's called Timber on Top, is one of the projects where you actually build, new stories on existing houses, where wood, if we talk about material optimization and so on, because of its lightness, makes it possible to add floors to an existing structure, which is not technically retrofitting, but it's still, you don't start from zero. So that's something that is, within this industry being developed in various ways. Yeah, just as a comment to that.
Yes, and then the following question, since we are talking also about importance of policy and regulations to make it the wood construction happen, have you, I'm addressing also Alberto and Hilma, have you studied also a little bit on sustainable forest harvest, in a way, as a driver, as a policy driver, let's say, have you encountered that information in your work or in other works?
Yeah, as I started saying before, maybe Hilma can say as well, but we haven't, we're not going into the harvesting and the sustainability of forest management. This is, of course, a very contested issue right now. We leave it there. The debate is there. We are analyzing the processes that follow on innovation specifically.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think also kind of linked to what Ida was saying, of course, it's important to be critical and kind of remember that the truth of the policy document is sometimes very contested, but then when there is this huge funding or huge decisions based on this policy document, then I think it's good to first kind of understand the process or kind of the logic of the policymakers, and then you know how to criticize it after you know how the how the flow of the thinking goes. And then you can go into discussions such as sustainable harvesting. Yeah.
But I saw in the questions in the chat as well, there was a discussion about decarbonization specifically. And here is where there is, so to say, a big focus on the potential in wood construction, because of course, the processes, the industrial processes behind harvesting and producing wood materials are much less energy intensive as opposed to concrete and steel. So that's if you want to make the equivalent. And then in the transport as well, wood is much lighter material to transport than cement and concrete. And at least in Sweden, Finland, it is locally sourced. Not always. Now we know that we're also importing from the Baltics, for example. So it's not all locally sourced. And so this is very much contextual as well. If we are talking about Iceland, where most of the construction materials are imported, then the sustainability discussion is different. So it's also important to consider the context here.
Thank you.
I think what we're looking at here is an example where we have mapped out, or you have mapped out, the actors and the institutions to try to understand how does it work in this sector, and I was a bit curious about what can we learn from these experiences about different actors and institutions involved for creating better policies for green innovation and for both for the construction sector and also for green innovation in general. We've heard that it was raised by Mari in the very beginning that innovation policy has moved from cluster policies now over to dealing with societal challenges. And we've heard you already today talking about curbing the CO2 emissions, the green transition as a driver for that change. But what do you think that we can learn from this mapping out in the wood construction sector, and how can we transfer that knowledge to other sectors? Is there a potential to do this?
Maybe we can start here, but maybe Ida and Therese have also something to say. But something that Ida brought up, that we are talking about the green transition now. So this is an important context to bring up, because we're moving from one regime to another, so to say, in various industrial fields. And something that we find surprising, or maybe not so surprising, is how the expectations were so high in the policy documents. For example, the Swedish strategy for wood construction aimed at was it that all 20 or 30% of all new buildings within 15 years should be in wood, and this was early 2000s. And of course, we were not there. We are maybe in 20% today. So this was a very high, ambitious goal that perhaps also tells something about our simplistic understanding of industrial transitions, the systemic perspective, how it's not so simple to drive these industrial processes, that bringing all actors together and transforming supply chains, it takes much more time than it looks like. So maybe that's one reflection. But
I would like to make one reflection. There's two areas that I would find it really interesting to apply the same kind of mapping, because we need to do it. And one is the fossil-free transportation area. I mean the car industry, and then the other one is because our mobility is very important to us. When we, as well as our homes, and also very hard to shift. I mean, it actually comes to the core of our lives, because we are, humans like comfort, and habits. And that applies for transportation as well. Another thing is actually knowledge. The models of knowledge, how that emerges and how knowledge should be, brought about. So that's or perhaps also something that's very important. A third thing is the healthcare systems, how we go about, creating sustainable healthcare systems that are both sustainable but also low in cost.
So in different areas is your belief this kind of mapping could prove useful and quite wide areas. What's your thoughts on this, Ida?
Yeah, I mean, having a completely different train of thought from this discussion, I think it's very important when we talk about what can we learn and what can other sectors learn and how can knowledge be transferred and so on, that we also, this is both a reflection, but perhaps also, like I would like to encourage people working with this, that we not only focus on what we call best practice and the good examples. And when we, like when you have visitors coming to Skellefteå and to other places, and all of you who are listening who are involved in this, like when you go on the study trips to learn, not just focus on what has been good, because I think there's so much important learning to be had from things that have gone wrong.
Absolutely.
So being like open to talk about failures as well, and also as a visitor being curious about failures, not of course like to embarrass anyone, but the learning that can come from failures. Because if you think about how we as human beings, when we learn things, I mean, we very seldom learn things when we succeed. We learn from like all the times that we failed before we succeeded. So I think this is also something important when we talk about wood building. And I mean, of course, it's a small market in a like a sea of giants doing things, and it's 20% of the current market approximately when we look at the apartment buildings and so on. But also to like be honest about failures, because I think that there's so much important learnings that could be had from that. Just a general thing, and also that we are interested in when things didn't go exactly according to plan. You have arrived at this place, but of course the route to building, I mean, if we talk about Sarah, for instance, it wasn't super straight. It was some detours before she was built, but now she's there, and there's lots of learning to be had from all of those different processes. And I think if we talk about sharing, and this is not, I mean, now Therese has to represent this activity of sharing knowledge, but of course also to Hilma and Alberto, when you do this type of work, that it's very much also.
I would like to comment on that, because it's sharing knowledge and how things go wrong. I was part of another project as my first project from when I graduated, and that's Turning Torso. And they really shared knowledge of what went wrong and right, because that also a very innovative project. And I think it's right that innovative projects share for the future.
And also, I was just very quickly, Ida, when we talked before, you also talked about the relevance of involving social scientists and involving a cross-disciplinary perspective. And that links also to a question in the chat that just popped up regarding the health benefits of wood construction and wood houses. So these issues are definitely something that can be analyzed from different perspectives. I mean, and the engineering perspective is different from an architecture perspective or from a social scientist or health perspectives. And in order to learn about those processes, perhaps we need to involve more of these cross-sectoral studies. Am I onto something here? What do you think, Ida and Therese?
I
Yes.
mean, yes, of course. But I think it's also important when we talk about this cross-disciplinary work to be mindful that it also takes longer time, because then you need these periods of like, you know, getting to know each other's language. Like for me, I mean, I work with research, but when I collaborate with researchers from other disciplines, we need to find this kind of common language. And I think it's very important when you work cross-disciplinary, regardless of sector, that you also are very mindful that this will, I mean, it will benefit the project, but it will take longer time because you need this kind of, I mean, translation periods. And if we talk about buildings and construction and so on, and we talked about money before, then you also need to be mindful that it perhaps will cost a bit extra. The result will be better, but it will be a longer process.
What's your final thoughts on this, Therese?
I do agree all the way. And I think, I also think getting, you know, having the different disciplines in a project actually makes you reflect more. You learn more, and you learn very much more, what do you say, you know, intuitive, and you, because you ask then, you know, you allow yourself to ask yourself, and you are asked questions that you did not think of, and it makes you actually, you know, if your building or if your product is an innovation, you should learn something from it. Then, if you do that and you have a different discipline present, you will actually get more from your innovation than otherwise. So I think it's quite, you know, it's important. Otherwise, it's a waste of money in a way. And money, we do agree, are very important.
Yeah. Thank you, Alberto.
I just wanted to make one reflection, commenting back to the debate that is both in terms of theory, but also the ideological debate around innovation and well, economics in general, which is what you brought up, Ida, about sharing failures. And within the private sector, there's almost this romanticized idea of failure. I mean, a good entrepreneur, a good businessman will fail many times until you get it right. But in the public sector, it's completely taboo. The public sector can't make mistakes. A public official will be grilled at the stake if you invested money in the wrong place. And this is very much the debate that also Matsukato brings up with entrepreneurial state. We have to allow the state and then the public institutions to make mistakes. And of course, this is an ideological debate as well. What is the role of the state? Should it retreat and let the market operate, or should it take a higher position within the market? So.
Thank you. I think we need to wrap this up. I thank you all for participating today in this webinar. The webinar has been recorded, and those participating will be sent a link after this session where you can revisit. And we also thank all of those of you that have listened in and come up with questions in our chat, and to our panelists and to our speakers here, Alberto and Hilma. It was very interesting, and I think we bring with us quite a few perspectives on the complexity of those issues and some learning experiences. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.